He was denied his first-class seat. But what happened next will shock everyone on board. In just 12 minutes, one man changed the course of the entire flight, and no one saw it coming. Watch until the end to witness the unbelievable twist. Airports are strange places. They're full of excitement, tension, and thousands of tiny stories unfolding at the same time. Some people rush to catch a flight, others linger at coffee stands, and many just want to get where they're going without a single problem. For David Cole, this particular morning was supposed to be just another routine travel day. Nothing more than a quick flight to an important board meeting overseas. David was no ordinary traveler. At only 43, he was already one of the most recognized black CEOs in the world. His company had grown from a small startup in a rented garage to a billion-dollar global powerhouse in less than a decade. He'd been featured in business magazines, invited to speak at world forums, and admired for his leadership. And yet, despite all his accomplishments, he carried himself with calm humility. For him, travel was just part of the job. That morning, he arrived at the airport with his assistant, checked in, and went through security like everyone else. His first-class ticket had been booked weeks in advance. After all, he needed the quiet and space to prepare for the high-stakes meeting waiting on the other side of the ocean. Everything seemed normal, until the moment came to board the plane. David walked toward the first-class gate, his boarding pass in hand. The gate agent, a woman in her late 30s, wearing the airline's crisp navy uniform, glanced at his ticket. Then she looked at him, hesitated, and frowned slightly. "Sir," she said after a pause, "there seems to be an issue with your seat." David raised his eyebrows politely. "Issue? That can't be right. This is a confirmed first-class ticket." The woman tapped at her computer, her tone growing firmer. "I'm sorry, sir. First class is full. I'll have to reassign you to economy." Passengers standing behind him looked on curiously. The airport atmosphere suddenly grew tense. A businessman in line shuffled uncomfortably. A couple with a toddler leaned closer to listen. David, calm as ever, pulled up his email confirmation on his phone and held it out. "Here's the reservation. Paid in full. Row 2A, window seat." The gate agent didn't even glance at the screen. "I understand, sir, but the seat is unavailable. Please accept this new boarding pass for economy." Her voice carried a sharp edge, one that suggested the conversation was over. David didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. Instead, he studied her face. Something about her refusal wasn't adding up. Just behind her shoulder, he could clearly see the flight manifest open on the monitor. And yes, rows 1 and 2, the premium cabin, still showed open spots. Passengers nearby noticed too. A young man whispered, "Why would they bump him when there are still seats?" Another muttered, "That doesn't make sense." David knew what was happening. This wasn't a computer error. It was personal. But years of experience had taught him not to respond with emotion. Leaders, he believed, don't let anger cloud judgment. So instead of arguing, he accepted the economy boarding pass, nodded once, and stepped aside. To the bystanders, it might have looked like surrender. But David's silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. As he walked down the jet bridge, a wave of mixed emotions hit him. Part of him felt the sting of humiliation. How many times had he worked twice as hard to earn the same respect as others? Another part of him was already calculating the next move. He had learned long ago that the best way to respond to injustice was not with noise, but with powerful, decisive action at the right moment. Inside the plane, David scanned the cabin. First class had several seats still open, perfectly polished, with their waiting glasses of champagne. The curtain separating first class from economy was still drawn back, making the emptiness impossible to miss. Yet here he was, walking toward the back with passengers who clearly recognized him. One woman, clutching her phone, whispered to her husband, "Isn't that David Cole, the tech guy from Forbes?" Her husband nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's him. What's he doing back here?" Others began murmuring too. Some were curious. Some looked uncomfortable. A few looked outraged on his behalf. But David kept moving, his expression unreadable. As he sat in the economy seat, he pulled out his tablet. On the screen glowed notes for the upcoming board meeting. But his mind wasn't on business anymore. He typed a new file name, Flight Report. He began jotting down everything that had just happened, times, names, behavior. Every detail mattered. Because David knew something most passengers didn't, the airline he was flying with was about to become very, very important to his company. Back at the gate, the flight attendant who had denied him the seat exchanged glances with a colleague. She seemed slightly nervous, though she tried to hide it. Passengers boarding after David looked confused. Some even asked questions. Why was that man denied first class if there were empty seats? The answer was always the same. First class is full, but it wasn't. Everyone could see it wasn't. And so, even before the plane pushed back from the gate, a story had already begun to spread among the passengers, quietly at first, but with a force that would soon become unstoppable. As the last of the passengers settled in, the cabin filled with the low hum of overhead bins shutting and seatbelts clicking. David leaned back, his face calm, though his mind was sharp and focused. He wasn't just thinking about the insult of being bumped. He was noticing other details. The way the crew avoided eye contact with him, the hurried tone of the captain's voice over the intercom, and the uncomfortable atmosphere settling like a heavy cloud over the plane. Something told him that this wasn't just about a seat. There was a deeper story unfolding, one that involved more than his pride, more than discrimination. His instincts, honed by years of leading through crises, whispered that the real problem hadn't even begun yet. And so, the man denied a first-class seat quietly prepared himself. He had no idea that within just 12 minutes, he would not only expose the truth, but also take control of the entire flight in a way no one on board could have imagined. The game had only just begun. The plane was alive with a nervous hum, the kind of quiet tension that passengers often feel but cannot explain. David Cole settled into his narrow economy seat, his shoulders pressed in by the closeness of the cabin. He wasn't a man unused to discomfort. After all, he had built his empire through long nights and hard choices, but the way he had been denied his rightful seat gnawed at him. It wasn't just the insult, it was the reason behind it. A reason he sensed, but hadn't yet seen clearly. From where he sat, David had a partial view of the first-class cabin. The curtain had not yet been drawn, and the empty seats stared back at him like unanswered questions. The polished headrests gleamed under the cabin lights. Champagne glasses waited neatly on trays, untouched. For a man with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, the lie was impossible to ignore. Passengers around him whispered. A young woman with a book in her lap nudged her husband and whispered softly, "That's him. I know it is. I saw his picture in the paper last week." Her husband leaned forward discreetly, pretending to stretch, then gave a slow nod. David Cole, the tech billionaire. But why's he back here? The whispers began to spread, at first cautious, then more confident. Smartphones glowed faintly as passengers tried to confirm their suspicions. Search bars filled with his name. Headlines appeared instantly. David Cole secures $2 billion deal. CEO launches new global initiative. Cole Foundation donates millions to education. Each article was another confirmation that the man sitting in seat 24C was not just any traveler. A teenager in the row behind him muttered in awe, "No way! That guy's worth more than this whole plane combined. Why would they put him in economy?" His mother shushed him, but her own gaze lingered on David with curiosity. David noticed the growing attention, but didn't respond. Instead, he kept his posture composed, scrolling calmly through the notes on his tablet. Outwardly, he appeared focused on his meeting. Inwardly, his mind was working like a chess master, moving invisible pieces across an unseen board. Every detail mattered. The clipped tone of the gate attendant, the avoidance of eye contact from the crew, the open seats up front, the way passengers now shifted uneasily, as if they sensed an injustice had occurred in front of their eyes. This wasn't just about him. It was about the culture of the airline. And from years of business experience, David knew that when small cracks show, bigger problems are always hiding beneath. As the last passengers boarded, the pilot's voice filled the cabin, low and hurried. He rattled through the announcements with barely a pause, as though he were trying to get the formality out of the way. His tone lacked the calm confidence that travelers expect from the person responsible for hundreds of lives. David caught the subtle unease in his voice, a trace of arrogance mixed with impatience. He made a mental note: check the pilot's history. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew moved down the aisles, checking seatbelts and bags. David could feel eyes on him from multiple directions. A businessman a few rows ahead kept sneaking glances, whispering to his companion. Two college students, a few seats across, openly stared until David met their gaze, forcing them to look away with embarrassed smiles. He wasn't trying to intimidate anyone, but his presence, calm and controlled, carried weight. He pulled out his phone, discreetly opening a secure line to his assistant back at headquarters. His voice was low, steady. "I need you to pull the file on the captain of this flight. Background, past complaints, anything unusual. Send it directly to me." His assistant didn't hesitate. "On it." David ended the call, slid the phone into his pocket and leaned back. The plane still hadn't moved. Outside the small oval window, the runway lights twinkled in the distance, but the aircraft remained parked at the gate. 15 minutes had passed and passengers began shifting in their seats impatiently. "Why aren't we moving?" someone muttered. "Didn't they say we were ready to depart?" Another asked. The unease spread like a ripple. Parents tried to distract children. A man in a suit pressed the call button and asked a flight attendant, "Is there a delay?" The attendant smiled tightly, but her answer was vague. "We'll be underway shortly." Her eyes betrayed her nerves. Darting quickly toward the cockpit before she hurried off, David's instincts sharpened. He had lived through enough negotiations, enough crises, to recognize when something wasn't right. And here on this plane, the air itself felt charged with tension. A soft buzz came from his tablet. The file had arrived. He opened it carefully, scanning through the text. Within seconds, his suspicions were confirmed. The pilot had a record. Several complaints filed against him in the past 3 years. Reports of arrogance toward crew, reckless decision-making, even disciplinary reviews that somehow never resulted in dismissal. His name had surfaced multiple times in internal investigations, yet he remained in command. David tapped his fingers lightly against the armrest. The picture was becoming clearer. The denial of his first-class seat was one insult, but the presence of this particular pilot was another problem altogether, one that could endanger far more than his pride. Meanwhile, the passengers' murmurs grew louder. "We've been sitting here too long," someone said. "What's going on up front?" The energy in the cabin shifted from quiet curiosity to unease. Even those who didn't know who David was could sense that something unusual was happening. And for those who did recognize him, the puzzle became more intriguing. Why would a man of his stature be treated this way? Why would he accept it so calmly? David sat in silence, letting the questions swirl around him. He had no intention of revealing his hand too soon. Timing was everything. He had built empires on patience and precision, knowing that the right move at the right time could change the course of an entire game. In that cramped economy seat, David Cole appeared to be just another passenger. But inside he was preparing to do what leaders do best: step in when no one else dares, make the decision others avoid, and take control when others falter. And though no one around him could have known it yet, the moment was coming soon, sooner than anyone expected. In just a matter of minutes, the whispers about his name would turn into gasps of disbelief. The unease would turn into shock, and the man who had been denied his rightful seat would become the one who determined the fate of everyone on that plane. The curtain to first class swayed slightly as a crew member walked past. The empty seats beyond it seemed almost symbolic now, silent witnesses to the injustice that had sparked a chain of events about to shake everyone on board. David looked at them one last time, then turned back to his tablet, his expression calm, his mind razor-sharp. The game was in motion. The next move would be his. The plane still hadn't moved, and the tension in the cabin thickened like a storm cloud. Passengers shifted in their seats, stretching or checking watches, but an unspoken unease hung over them. Conversations had largely ceased, replaced by quiet speculation. Everyone sensed that something unusual was unfolding, even if they couldn't put it into words. David Cole, seated in the cramped economy section, observed everything with the calm scrutiny of a seasoned strategist. He noticed subtle interactions, the way the crew avoided his gaze, how the flight attendants' movement seemed hurried yet cautious, and the barely concealed frustration in the faces of a few passengers who had witnessed the earlier boarding conflict. Every detail added another piece to the puzzle. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time more clipped than before. His announcements were rushed, lacking the usual confidence and authority expected from someone responsible for hundreds of lives. David's instincts immediately picked up on the subtleties: hesitation in phrasing, a lack of clarity about departure times, and an oddly defensive tone whenever he mentioned safety procedures. It wasn't a dramatic flaw, it was subtle yet telling. David discreetly opened his tablet and reviewed the flight file his assistant had sent him earlier. The history of the captain was concerning. Several formal complaints over the past few years, citing reckless decision-making, abrasive behavior toward crew members, and disregard for standard procedures. Even more alarming was that these issues had somehow never led to serious consequences. The captain remained in command, a risk hidden behind a polished uniform and confident facade. He looked around the cabin again. A few passengers had started taking note of his presence, whispering quietly. The woman with the book and her husband were still trying to make sense of the situation, stealing glances and exchanging hushed comments. Even those who didn't recognize him could sense something unusual. The tension in the air was palpable. David had always believed that perception was a powerful tool. In this moment, it was working in his favor. Minutes ticked by. The plane remained stationary, the engines humming softly but not powering forward. Passengers began to murmur about the delay. A man in a suit asked the flight attendant, "How much longer until we take off?" She replied vaguely, avoiding eye contact, "We'll be departing shortly." The uncertainty only heightened the nervousness in the cabin. David stayed calm, observing, calculating. He wasn't here merely to witness injustice, he was preparing to act. He understood that leadership often required decisive action in the right moment. Waiting, observing, and gathering information could give him an advantage no one else had. A young couple in the row ahead whispered to each other, clearly curious. "Did you see him at the gate?" "He was supposed to be in first class," the woman said. Her voice was low but filled with incredulity. The man nodded, leaning closer. "I can't believe they made him sit back here. Look at those empty seats up front. Something isn't right." David's gaze followed their line of sight. The first-class cabin, still visible through the curtain, showed empty seats. The discrepancy was undeniable. He noted the expressions of the passengers as they realized the truth themselves. The denial of his seat wasn't due to a lack of space. It was a deliberate act. At that moment, David's assistant texted him a follow-up. The report confirmed the pilot's history in detail, prior incidents of misconduct, including failure to follow protocol, verbal altercations with crew members, and a pattern of poor judgment. David's mind processed the information quickly, connecting it to the events he had just witnessed. It became clear that this flight was not only mishandling passenger seating, it was potentially compromising safety. He took a deep breath and leaned back, keeping his composure. Outwardly, he appeared calm and focused, but inwardly he was strategizing. The first step was observation. The next would be action. Every movement in the cabin was now part of a larger assessment. How would the crew respond if challenged? How would passengers react if the situation escalated? And most importantly, How would the pilot respond when confronted with someone who refused to accept injustice quietly? As the minutes dragged on, the energy in the cabin shifted. The initial curiosity of the passengers evolved into unease, a quiet tension that made every small sound noticeable. The rustle of a magazine page, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the occasional clink of a tray table. David noticed it all. He was absorbing the environment, reading people as carefully as he read data in a business report. A flight attendant approached, checking seatbelts and offering water. She avoided direct eye contact with David, giving him a polite but distracted smile. Her hands shook slightly, betraying a hint of anxiety. David recognized it immediately. The staff knew something was off. Perhaps they had seen the pilot's behavior before. Perhaps they understood that this situation was more than a simple seating error. David kept his voice low and calm when he spoke to a nearby passenger who whispered, "Isn't that David Cole?" He nodded slightly but said nothing. Actions, not words, would speak louder in the minutes to come. Outside, the runway lights blinked steadily, a constant reminder that the plane should have already been in motion. The delay was becoming more noticeable. Murmurs turned to questions. A business traveler tapped his phone impatiently, trying to contact someone on the ground. Another passenger fidgeted, adjusting her mask repeatedly, glancing toward the cockpit with concern. David's focus remained unwavering. He reviewed the timeline in his head. Boarding denial, observation of empty first-class seats, the pilot's unusual behavior, and the history report. Each piece of information confirmed a troubling pattern. The pilot's arrogance, combined with a record of misconduct, posed a risk that could affect every single person on board. He reached for his phone once more, confirming a secure connection with his assistant. "Prepare a detailed report on all incidents linked to this pilot," he instructed. "Include internal reviews and any regulatory notices." "I'll need it immediately," the assistant responded almost instantly. Within moments, the file appeared on his screen, comprehensive and detailed. David scanned it carefully, his mind connecting the dots. Every warning, every complaint, every record of poor judgment formed a pattern. This was not a competent, careful professional. This was a liability, a danger disguised behind a uniform and a title. Passengers continued to shift in their seats, the low hum of anxiety growing. David observed how fear and curiosity interacted in the confined space of the aircraft. Some passengers whispered excitedly, others sat tensely, unsure of what was unfolding. The young couple ahead had stopped speaking, exchanging anxious glances as they realized the gravity of the situation. David remained calm, outwardly composed, inwardly ready. He had learned through experience that a decisive leader remains measured under pressure. Observation, assessment, and strategy were all part of the process. The stage was set. The next move would define not just the flight, but the message of authority, justice, and accountability. By now, everyone in the cabin could feel that the delay and the unusual atmosphere were signs that something significant was about to happen. Passengers' curiosity had reached a tipping point. Some were aware of who David Cole was, others simply sensed that the man in economy held influence far beyond what was visible. David took a final glance at the first-class seats, still empty, and then back at the pilot, whose voice came over the intercom again, hurried, defensive, clearly impatient. The stage was ready, the tension was palpable, and David knew that within minutes the quiet observation would shift into action. And the story of this flight would become unforgettable. The plane remained at the gate, the engines humming, the passengers tense, and David Cole poised, fully aware that the coming moments would not just resolve the seating issue, they would redefine authority and fairness at 30,000 feet. The cabin was tense, thick with a quiet anxiety that seemed to ripple through every row of seats. Passengers fidgeted, glanced nervously toward the cockpit and whispered among themselves. David Cole sat in economy, calm but alert, absorbing everything. He had observed, analyzed, and now the moment for action had arrived. The denial of his first-class seat had been the spark, but the fuel for what was about to unfold lay in something far deeper: the pilot's record and the risks it posed to everyone aboard. David stood slowly, deliberately, catching the eye of a flight attendant as he moved. She stiffened, her smile fading. The passengers immediately noticed the shift. Some craned their necks, trying to understand what was happening. Phones appeared in hands ready to record. The whispers intensified. Is he going to? He approached the front of the cabin with a composed authority that immediately commanded attention. The hum of nervous conversation lowered to a murmur. The captain, seated behind the controls, looked up from the cockpit panel, irritation crossing his features. He had already sensed something unusual about the man in economy, but the full weight of the situation was yet to reveal itself. David stopped near the first-class curtain, his posture firm but respectful. "May I speak with the captain?" His voice was calm, steady, but carried a clarity that left no room for debate. A flight attendant stepped forward, hesitating. "Sir, the captain is busy," she said, her tone wavering. "I understand," David replied, "but this is urgent. It concerns safety and proper protocol." The captain emerged slowly, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. He adjusted his cap, trying to regain composure, but there was a flicker of tension in his eyes. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by a passenger. David looked directly at him, measuring every word. "Earlier, I was denied my first-class seat, even though there were open seats available. That was wrong. But what I am addressing now is far more serious. I have reviewed your record, and I am aware of several complaints about misconduct and poor judgment. These are not trivial matters. They concern the safety of everyone on this aircraft." The captain's face hardened. "Sir, this is my flight. I'm in command. Your information is irrelevant." David's gaze did not waver. "You may believe that, but I have information you do not. I also have the authority to ensure safety on this flight. I'm asking you to step aside immediately." A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers froze in their seats, phones poised but not yet raised. Some exchanged glances of disbelief. A billionaire in economy, challenging the captain mid-flight. The audacity, the precision, the authority. It was almost cinematic. David continued, his voice firm but composed. "I am not here to argue about first-class seating. I'm here to address a risk that cannot be ignored. Your behavior, documented history, and poor judgment make you unfit to operate this flight. I'm ordering you to step down immediately." For a moment there was silence. The crew exchanged nervous glances. The passengers leaned forward, sensing that they were witnessing history. The pilot's jaw tightened. He had been in command hundreds of times, confident that no passenger could challenge him. But something about David, the way he carried himself, the calm authority in his voice, the knowledge he displayed, was different. Then came the revelation. David, maintaining eye contact, said, "You are mistaken if you think I am just another passenger. My company recently acquired the airline's parent corporation. This flight, this aircraft, and the operations are now under my authority. I'm exercising that authority now." The cabin erupted, not in noise, but in stunned gasps. Passengers stared at him, some in awe, some in disbelief. Phones that had been poised to record now actively recorded. The murmurs escalated. "No way. Is that true? He owns the airline? This is insane." The captain paled. He had underestimated the man in economy, and now he faced a reality he could not ignore. The weight of documented complaints, corporate authority, and the undeniable presence of a man who commanded attention left him trapped. There was no argument, no escape. Security personnel were called forward, though no one was entirely sure what they were being asked to do. The flight attendants stood silently, the tension in their faces clear. David gestured calmly but firmly toward the cockpit. "Please escort the captain off the aircraft. He is relieved of duty, effective immediately." The passengers were silent for a moment, watching as the pilot, red-faced and furious, was led down the aisle. Some whispered encouragement to David. Others simply stared in disbelief, unable to process what they were seeing. A woman next to him muttered, "I have never seen anything like this." David walked back toward his seat, his demeanor unchanged. To the passengers, he seemed almost serene. To those paying attention, he was a man who had calculated, observed, and executed with precision. The first-class seating issue had been the trigger, but this was about safety, fairness, and accountability. The replacement pilot arrived shortly after, a professional already on standby. Within minutes, he was in the cockpit, conducting standard pre-flight checks. The tension in the cabin began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of relief. Passengers murmured quietly, some applauding. They had just witnessed an extraordinary act. A man denied a seat asserting authority and ensuring safety at 30,000 feet. David finally settled into the first-class seat that had originally been his. The transition was seamless, but the impact on the passengers was profound. A collective sigh of relief filled the cabin. Phones still recorded, whispers persisted, and the energy in the air shifted from tension to admiration. He turned to address the passengers, his voice calm but resonant. Today was not about a seat. It was about respect, fairness, and safety. No one, regardless of position, should be denied their rights or placed at risk. I hope this serves as a reminder that leadership is not about authority alone. It is about responsibility and integrity. The cabin erupted in applause, some passengers even standing to show their support. The young couple ahead of him exchanged glances, astonished. "He didn't just handle the seat. He handled everything," the woman whispered. By the time the plane was cleared for takeoff, the story had already begun to spread through the passengers' social media networks. Tweets, short videos, and live streams documented every moment. The story of the man denied first class who grounded a plane and fired the pilot was about to go viral. David leaned back, finally allowing a hint of satisfaction. The injustice had been addressed, the risk neutralized. And in doing so, he had demonstrated something rare: leadership under pressure, decisiveness in crisis, and the ability to act when no one else would. The plane began to taxi. Engines roared with life as it prepared for takeoff. Passengers watched the city lights blur past the windows, still processing the events that had just transpired. For many, this was more than a flight. They had been part of an extraordinary moment, one that would stay in memory long after landing. David Cole, once denied his rightful seat, had not only claimed what was his, but had also safeguarded everyone on the plane. In a matter of minutes, he had turned a situation of insult into a moment of accountability, power, and justice. And for those watching from the airport, from home, or from social media feeds, the lesson was clear: courage, preparation, and decisive action could change everything. The cabin settled into a quiet hum of normalcy, but the impact of the actions taken was far from over. Passengers whispered among themselves, exchanging stories, recording details, and preparing to share what they had just witnessed. The plane took off smoothly, yet the echoes of that extraordinary 12 minutes would reverberate far beyond the runway. The plane leveled off smoothly after takeoff, engines humming with a controlled, steady rhythm. For most passengers, the routine of flight had returned. Drinks were served, seatbelts clicked, and some tried to relax. Yet the atmosphere remained charged, a palpable sense of awe lingering over the cabin. What had just unfolded was not something they could easily forget. David Cole leaned back in his first-class seat, a quiet calm settling over him. To anyone looking from a distance, he seemed like a man simply settling into comfort after a long day of travel. But in truth, his mind was alert, reflecting on the swift events that had transpired. He had stepped into a situation that could have escalated into chaos. Yet with measured observation, strategic thinking, and decisive action, he had taken control and ensured the safety of everyone aboard. Passengers around him were still whispering, exchanging glances, and quietly discussing the events in hushed tones. The young couple a few rows ahead spoke softly but fervently. "Did you see that?" the woman asked, eyes wide. "He didn't just reclaim his seat. He handled the pilot and the whole flight. Her husband nodded, equally astonished. I've never seen anything like it. That was courage. Even those who had not recognized him before were now aware. Phones quietly captured moments, videos destined to circulate across social media. The murmurs carried through the cabin. I can't believe that just happened. Who even is this guy? That's incredible. He literally fired the pilot. David allowed himself a brief moment to reflect. Leadership, he thought, was often tested in unexpected circumstances. It was one thing to make decisions in a boardroom, surrounded by advisors and analysts. It was another entirely to act decisively in real time, under pressure, with hundreds of people dependent on your judgment. He had proven, even to himself, that leadership was as much about courage and observation as it was about authority. He reached for his tablet and drafted a brief note to his executive team, summarizing the events of the morning. He highlighted the risks, the actions taken, and the lessons learned. This would not be a public relations stunt. It was a matter of principle, accountability, and safety. Every executive needed to understand how quickly a situation could escalate, and how vital it was to act with both confidence and discretion. The replacement pilot, a seasoned professional, had already established control of the cockpit. Communication was precise, clear, and professional. Within minutes, the remaining uncertainty in the cabin began to fade. Passengers started to relax, but their attention was still drawn to David. Some discreetly took photos, while others whispered, "That's the man who just changed the course of this flight." The flight attendants, previously tense and uneasy, now moved with subtle relief. They no longer had to worry about mismanagement or a potential crisis. David's intervention had ensured that the flight would proceed safely. Some crew members even offered him polite nods of acknowledgement. David understood the human element of what had happened. This was more than authority. It was about respect and recognition. People respond to leadership not only through rules and hierarchy, but through example. By stepping up calmly and decisively, he had demonstrated the values he wanted to uphold: fairness, courage, and integrity. A mother seated nearby glanced at her child and whispered, "Remember what you saw today. Courage can change everything." Her child nodded, eyes wide with fascination, as if witnessing history in motion. The subtle lessons were not lost on anyone paying attention. Leadership, responsibility, and justice had just been taught at 30,000 feet. David knew the story would spread quickly. Within minutes, passengers would share their experiences on social media. Headlines would appear by the time they landed. "Billionaire CEO denies injustice and fires pilot mid-flight," or "David Cole takes command, a flight to remember." The narrative would be told and retold, inspiring countless individuals and raising discussions about accountability and courage in everyday life. He looked out the window at the vast sky. There was something symbolic about this moment. High above the ground, in a controlled environment, the truth had prevailed. It was a reminder that justice, when combined with courage and the right action, could overcome even the most entrenched obstacles. As the flight progressed, the cabin slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, though the memory of what had happened lingered. Passengers talked quietly among themselves, some still staring in awe, others replaying the moments on their phones. Every interaction, every whispered comment, reinforced the impact of David's actions. David leaned back, considering the implications beyond the immediate situation. This was not merely a personal victory. It was a broader message. Corporations, employees, and individuals alike had lessons to take from this event. Accountability could not be ignored. Authority must be exercised responsibly, and courage was required to correct wrongs, even in unexpected circumstances. He glanced around once more, noting the subtle changes in the cabin atmosphere. Smiles were more relaxed, conversations were warmer, and a collective sense of relief had replaced the earlier tension. People felt safer, more respected, and more aware of the power of decisive leadership. The plane continued its journey, smooth and steady. David allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, knowing he had acted appropriately, ethically, and effectively. But he also knew that real leadership was not about personal satisfaction. It was about impact. By taking action, he had ensured not only his own rights, but the safety and well-being of everyone aboard. A flight attendant approached him quietly, offering a water refill and a polite smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "You did what needed to be done." David nodded appreciatively. "It was necessary. I hope this serves as a reminder that fairness and safety must always come first." The passengers continued to watch, some openly, some discreetly. The story had become something more than just a moment in time. It was now a lesson in integrity and courage. Everyone present would carry the memory of those 12 minutes forever, understanding that decisive action, calm observation, and moral courage could transform even the most challenging circumstances. As the plane approached cruising altitude, David reflected on the personal growth embedded in the experience. While he had been denied a seat, he had claimed far more than that. He had demonstrated what leadership truly meant. Authority without action was meaningless. Position without responsibility was hollow. True influence came from courage, wisdom, and the ability to act when it mattered most. The flight attendants, now more relaxed, moved efficiently through the cabin. Passengers adjusted in their seats, chatting quietly, sharing videos, and discussing the extraordinary event. David observed it all, aware that the ripple effect of these actions would extend far beyond the airplane, influencing social media, corporate culture, and public perception. He reached for his tablet again, drafting a brief reflection for internal sharing with his team. Lessons about authority, timing, observation, and ethical responsibility were carefully recorded. These would serve not just as a log of events, but as a teaching tool for those who would one day lead others. David's thoughts briefly returned to the pilot. The man had been removed, not just for the seat denial, but because of a pattern of reckless behavior and poor judgment. Accountability had been applied swiftly and decisively, a reminder that no one, regardless of position, was above responsibility. It was a message that would resonate beyond the cabin. Passengers continued to glance at him with respect and awe. Even those who had initially been unaware of his identity now understood the significance of his presence. A quiet admiration permeated the cabin, mingled with relief and inspiration. As the hours passed, the flight continued smoothly, uneventful in motion, but extraordinary in its lessons. Every passenger had witnessed something rare, a man denied respect, asserting authority, correcting wrongs, and ensuring safety in real time. It was a moment that would remain vivid in memory, shared widely, and discussed in countless conversations. By the time the plane began its descent, the impact of the 12 minutes in which David had acted decisively had already extended far beyond the cabin. Passengers prepared for landing with a new sense of understanding. Leadership, courage, fairness, and accountability had been demonstrated at the highest altitude, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. As the wheels touched the runway, applause broke out spontaneously. The passengers, still processing the extraordinary events, expressed their gratitude and astonishment. David Cole had transformed a flight delay and a seating dispute into a lesson in integrity and responsibility, ensuring safety and justice for all. The story was more than just about being denied a seat. It was about standing up, making difficult decisions, and leading with courage when it mattered most. And as the passengers disembarked, sharing their experiences and videos with the world, one fact became clear: leadership is measured not by title alone, but by action, integrity, and the willingness to do what is right, even when no one expects it. David Cole walked off the plane, calm, composed, and aware that those 12 minutes had changed everything, for him, for the passengers, and for everyone who would hear the story. The impact of decisive action, fairness, and courage had been witnessed by hundreds, And the story was just beginning to ripple outward, leaving a lasting impression on all who heard it. And that's how David Cole turned a moment of injustice into a historic act of courage and leadership. What would you do if you were in his shoes? Comment below with your thoughts, smash that like button if this story shocked you, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable true stories that will leave you speechless.